Today we're going to talk about another case involving battered spouse syndrome. And in this case, the cops behaved very badly indeed. Margaret Mallott lived with her common law husband, Paul Mallott, for about 19 years in Essex County, Ontario. They had two children together. She'd been married before for 7 years to a man who was violently abusive to her and to her 5 children. Paul Mallott was abusive as well in nearly every way: physically, sexually, psychologically, emotionally. Prosecutors conceded that the abuse was horrible and lasted for nearly 19 years. He would leave her repeatedly in those years and have a number of affairs, and then when he came back, he would tell her all about how unsatisfying she was compared to the other women. He would beat her, force her to obtain Percocet for him, and humiliate and torment her. She herself was addicted to prescription drugs. Margaret tried to get help from police and tried to complain, went to them for protection, but Paul was also a police informant. He informed on drug dealers, and so he was far more important to police than the complaints of Margaret. So they told Paul all about what Margaret told them. And in turn, Paul would escalate his abuse of Margaret. Classy, right? Were they held accountable? No, they were not. They should have been, but they weren't. Just a few months before March 1991, Paul left Margaret and took their son to go live with his girlfriend, Carrie Sherwood. Margaret and her daughter continued to live with Paul's mother. Paul would show up to visit his mother and often brought his girlfriend along with him. On his very last day, March 23rd, 1991, Margaret was supposed to go with her abusive ex to a medical center to get some prescription drugs that he would use in his illegal drug trade. She took a .22 pistol from his gun cabinet in the home, loaded it, and carried it in her purse. And then they drive together to the medical center. Apparently, Paul choked her during an argument in the car, and eventually they arrive at the pharmacy, but it's closed, and that's when Margaret shot him to death, emptying the gun. And there are different theories on why it happened at that moment. Margaret would say, well, she was afraid of what would happen because the pharmacy was closed and she had to go back to that car without the drugs. And the prosecution would say, no, that was just an advantageous time. So Margaret left the car, took a cab, and went to Sherwood's house. Margaret shot her, then stabbed her with a knife. Sherwood fought for her life, and she would actually survive. Neighbors called the police over the fighting, and they would arrive to find an exhausted Mallott. They arrested her, and then they took Sherwood to the hospital. She was convicted of attempted murder for the girlfriend. She was convicted of second-degree murder for the ex. The jury, though, would recommend that because of the abuse, she get the minimum sentence. And the jury rightly would not extend the battered spouse syndrome arguments to the attack on Sherwood. Mallott was sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 10 years, which is the lowest possible sentence she could have received under Canadian law for second-degree murder. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying these videos and you want to see more, please click the subscribe button and hit those notifications so that you don't miss any uploads. We appreciate you. Thanks.